Actually, what's interesting about the pregame that we just had is I feel like we truly are now one step closer to knowing the entire world. I feel like I know you now, Mark, a little bit more. And through just 6 degrees of separation, I feel like we now know the world a little bit tighter. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I'm a feeling guy. Like I don't know where I am most of the time. My wife gets really frustrated with me because we've lived in the same town for our whole marriage. And she's like, how can you get lost in your own hometown? But I make up for it in feelings, like, so I can't draw a house. There's nothing visual that's a strength for me. But what is a strength is my feelings and being able to feel into people. And I liked you guys from the minute we started. So and I trust that implicitly.
Nice,
Appreciate
nice.
that.
Yeah, I feel like there's some connections as well. We were talking about some offline that I'll resurface here, but also just in terms of knowing people and that whole 6 degrees of separation. We've both, or all three of us actually, have had the opportunity to meet people like Marshall Goldsmith and Alex Budak. We both have had them on our podcast, so there's another connection there as well in terms of just we're gonna know the world together eventually.
Did you get to Alex on your own, or did you see that he had been on my podcast?
I actually reached out to him directly prior to knowing that he was on your podcast. And then with Marshall, we got connected. And then in preparation for our conversation today, I noticed that, wow, both of these folks have been on Mark's podcast. This is awesome.
That's great. Marshall's my coach, actually. So
Wow.
yeah.
That is awesome.
Oh, yeah.
How long have you been working with Marshall?
He has a group called the 100 Coaches, and so I've been a part of it for a couple of years now. And it was interesting because when, and I actually asked him this on my podcast. I go, well, I didn't apply. When he put this thing out that, hey, I've been successful and I just want to give back and I want to pick 100 people to coach, I thought he was going to pick like people at the Goodyear, like the tire repair place, the manager, like he was going to help people at that level. And so then I start to see, the announcement of who he's chosen. And I'm like, wait a minute, these are all the people that are like my peers. Like, why would they need coaching? And so I had another guest on my podcast, Hubert Joly, who used to be the CEO of Best Buy. And right in the middle of the podcast, he goes, are you part of Marshall's group? And I go, no. And then I told him, I go, here's why. I just didn't think it would apply to me. But now I realize what a fool I was. And he goes, I'm going to get you. So that's how I got in.
That's awesome.
Very cool.
Yeah, he referenced that gentleman on our podcast as well. And, one of the things from our conversation that I took away was, folks at the higher levels, they crave coaching and, it's not easy, right? So they use coaches as a way to stay accountable, to stay on track of their program. And another thing that stuck out to me from that conversation is how much true leaders seek out feedback. I found that so fascinating because, as an individual contributor, my entire life, someone who's trying to move up the ranks, you kind of look at feedback or think about feedback in a weird way. But after that conversation with Marshall, I feel like I've been proactively seeking it from people, like point blank, just asking for it. Tell me the truth. Tell me the feedback. Where can I get better? Because in my brain, it was like, if the best of the best are seeking this, then I should be doing something similar as well.
Well, interestingly, Hubert was already the CEO of Best Buy and had already been a partner at McKinsey. So to test your theory, you'd say, well, what does he need coaching for? But he went to Marshall and paid Marshall a lot of money, made a huge investment. I don't know if you've ever been on the other side of this, but I have a client, somebody who worked for me many years ago, who's a very close friend of mine. And he goes, I've got a guy who's struggling and I need you to coach him. I go, I don't have time for that. That's not what I do. And he goes, please. And so he's since given me like 3 or 4 other people, and I do it just like for the practice of it. Mm-hmm. And what I realize is, to your point, is like everybody needs a coach. I mean, it's like this little rudder that I have, I'm not giving people major turn right, no, stop, you can't do that. I'm not doing that. I'm like, hey, if you could just like soften that approach just a little bit and just do this and just like move the rudder a little bit, you're going to see, you're going to pick up speed, you're going to pick up momentum, you're going to pick up respect. And I see the impact that I have. And I forgot that because it's been a while since I've had a team of people, large team that you could see it every day, your impact, positively and negatively. And so when I see the progress that people are making and in relationship to, because basically what my friend did was he goes, Mark's coaching a couple of our guys, anybody else want it? And a couple of them like, nah, I don't need coaching. And I think you have no idea what a mistake you're making, man, because not only could I help you, but any coach could help you because they're seeing your world objectively. You're seeing it from your vantage point. And I think it comes down to being so self-secure in yourself that like there's nothing you could say to me. I had a guest on who listened, they didn't want to come on my podcast until they listened to like 10 of them. And so I said offline, I said, and I didn't think to do it online, it would have been just as fine. I said, you listen to 10 of them? Give me one piece of advice that I could do to be better. And they did. And it was semi-critical, but I could have taken it like, oh, you didn't want to give me a compliment and tell me that they were all wonderful. Right. I'm not going to learn from that.
Right.
So you have to be open to it and you have to ask people for it. And my strategy, to my book, you probably read it, but my strategy is it's a trick. You ask people to give you one thing that you do well. And because they're working for you, they want to tell you all the fantastic, oh, you're God, you should be king of the world. You're the greatest leader I've ever had. And they go, oh, thank you so much. It's so great. And then when you've taken a space and you start to almost walk away, you go, hey, since you gave me something that, you think I'm doing really well, you give me one thing that I could work on, like something that I could become a more effective leader if I did. And I go, oh no, Mark, you're the best. You're the best. I got nothing for you. And I go, well, you gave me something really good. You gave me something really positive. So you surely could give me something, it doesn't have to be much. Well, what I learned is they've been thinking about it for a really long time. Like they see the glaring problem. And so they give you this punch in the stomach. You never do this. And then, you favor this person and I never get what they get. Or, this is just extemporaneous, but you get the idea that they have this feedback. And so the first time I did it, it was painful because everybody had something. Yeah. But once I realized, so I went and told them, here's the list. Here are all the things. And they were laughing their asses off because, here I am going, Mark doesn't do this, and Mark doesn't do this, and Mark doesn't do this. And I said, I'm reading this to you because I'm committing to fixing them. And my team just loved me for that because it's like, who does that? Who's willing to be that transparent, So you have to take the pain, but that's how you grow. That's how you become better.
Totally. Absolutely. And on that topic of feedback, I mean, just to keep pulling threads on it, you displayed it in your book, Lead from the Heart, which was, most people actually crave the bad news first. So when you're delivering feedback, instead of trying to, sandwich it between one piece of positive feedback with something negative and then something positive, by the time you do that entire process, I mean, the person you're talking to is already deflated. So according to research,
they hate you.
Yeah, so there you go. So give them the tough, bad news first, and then from that point, gather how they react. If anything else needs to be said, you can use that opportunity. But then more importantly, you instantly switch to going into, okay, we've talked about that. Now let's talk about how we can improve it. And then all of a sudden, your conversation actually is rolling into a more positive one. So the momentum builds from something slightly negative to positive. And by the end of it, the person who's receiving it, they probably feel more empowered to actually take the advice and actually act on it because they have this kind of like end goal in mind of, okay, I might be weak in this one area, but I know what I can do to improve. And so I picked that up from.
Perfectly said, the way you described it. And it was Mary Kay. You know who Mary Kay is? She's the cousin cosmetics clean. She used to give her top salespeople pink Cadillacs. And so she came up with this idea of the feedback sandwich. So Arjun, you're really doing great in meeting your sales goal. And I really don't like your attitude. And oh, by the way, I really like your new car, whatever, and people are like, what'd you say in between those two? And like, why did you start it off like that? And so you just got to get right to it. Look, I want to talk to you specifically, and you tell them what your process is. I'm going to give you some feedback, and it may or may not hurt you, but what we're going to spend most of the time on is on how I can help you get better. Are you up for that? Everybody says yes. And then you give it to them, and there have been plenty of people who've heard me say this, say, no, the sandwich works great. And the evidence is just not there. People resent it because they think, oh, you're giving them these compliments. And then all of a sudden it's weakness from a leadership standpoint. You're sneaking in the critical feedback and then giving them another positive feedback. And it doesn't really help the person improve anyway, because it's like, which one do you want me to focus on?
Yeah, exactly. And so I think what you're alluding to actually is something that you've been pounding the table on ever since you left or quit your corporate job leadership career, which was one of the primary reasons I reached out to you, is because you quit your corporate career. You launched this project to go share this message that you have to, bring your heart into business management. You have to bring your heart into organizational culture. And as a leader, it's your responsibility to think of your employee and really think about their well-being, think about their growth, and think about their success. And I'm sure that idea was met with resistance, was met with skepticism, and it was probably dismissed. And it might still be dismissed today, but you're touching on a lot of, kind of the themes that you share in this book. And so let's just kind of jump right into it. I mean, why do you think it is such a cultural belief that tells us in the business world specifically, we should ignore the heart and the emotion, and that we should avoid bringing it into leadership?
Well, the simple answer is that we've taught managers for over 100 years, going back to the Industrial Revolution. Let's just start there. When we started putting people into, factories, the fundamental belief was, the more you can get out of people, the more you can squeeze out of them, the more you're going to make as a business owner. And people fundamentally don't want to work. So in order to make them work, you're going to have to put them under fear. You're going to have to put them under pressure. And you have to put them under the threat of losing their job. So if you don't keep up, if your goal is 10 widgets a day and you do 9, look, I got somebody waiting for me. You're just warming their chair. And I'm totally fine getting somebody else in there because I don't really care about you. I just care about making my 10 widgets a day. So I'm going to pay you to do the 10. If you do 11, I'm going to give you extra. Beyond that, I don't really care about you. Transactional, that's what our relationship is. And the reason that that's endured so long is because it worked for you too. So meaning you needed money to meet your basic needs for food and shelter, right? You had rent to pay and kids to feed and all that. So you basically accepted whatever the employer was needs. Mm-hmm. Well, what's happened is that probably was never an effective way of managing human beings. But when you're not getting your basic needs met, you're willing to take anything. So I'm of a different generation than you. And I can tell you, even though I had some good employers and some very good employers in my career, I had some really toxic bosses who really didn't care about. And I just thought that my generation just thought, well, that's what work is. Work sucks. You're going to have to put up with that. You're going to have to suffer through really bad bosses. But what's been happening is two things happening. One's the overlay and another is more dramatic. The overlay is that as more of us got to a point where we were meeting our basic needs or earning enough money to meet our basic needs, and we've got a little extra money. So money isn't the motivator anymore. I can pay my rent I got a nice car, and I'm not worried about money anymore. I start to go, like, I want more from this job than just a paycheck. I want this to be meaningful. I want to make a contribution. I want to leave, I want to go home thinking I did something substantial. Like, all of that's important. But also that, like, if I'm going to work really hard for you, I want to know that you're the boss. So you probably know the job better than I do. So teach me, tell me what you know, coach me, help me, advocate for me. So we have this migration where people are wanting more from work, and managers just kept squeezing people, paying them as little as possible. I mean, that model exists. Walmart, Target, these are organizations that have generally leaned into pay them as much as it's going to take in order to get them and keep them, but that's it. Like, we're not doing any more than that. And this has been the model for a really long time. But while the evolution was happening, COVID really focused people in ways that only a global pandemic could have done. So what happened is we all got sent home March of 2020. We're working from home. We go into the kind of survival mode. Then all of a sudden we realize this is going to be going on this way for a while, and we settle into a rhythm. And now we have a little more time. We don't have the commute every day, and we've got a little more time. And we start thinking, am I working for the right person? Am I working for the right company? Am I in the right job? And so the answer was no, no, and no, 100 million times. Nearly 100 million people quit their jobs in America alone in the last 2 years. And that's because people pinned down the evolution. Like, they've been suffering for so long, and they're like, I'm not getting anything I need out of this job. And so it was like, hot potato. They just jumped, a lot of them. And you're reading stats saying now that, a lot of people are regretting it. They have some regrets, but I don't think very few people are saying, oh, I regret leaving that boss and that company, and I wish I could go back. No, they're just saying it didn't get any better because we haven't really fixed the problem yet.
Yeah. And actually, in that change, maybe they even took a pay cut thinking that there is going to be better. And so now you're in a situation where you're in a similar feeling situation. You have less pay, and there's some grief involved when you think about losing your previous lifestyle. So that's really interesting. And to your point around this traditional leadership model has been around since the Industrial Revolution, but here we are as a human workforce that has constantly changing needs, constantly evolving requirements of what's going to be fulfilling work. And I think it's really an important conversation to have right now, because companies, they have an incentive right now to be looking at their leadership models. A lot of folks are, especially in the tech space, they're going through layoffs. And so in a layoff, you're going to have a transformation of organizational culture. And there's a huge financial motivation here to get it right, because something that you talked about in your book, there was a study by a professor at UC Irvine. And basically what he had found is that on average, it's going to take an employer to pay 122% of a departing employee's annual salary to find and train the replacement. So we have this incentive here for organizations to really take this conversation seriously right now.
Yeah, but they haven't. That's the thing. And so, I've got a little like bald spot coming in here from like scratching it so much. I mean, when you think about this, I mean, one of the most distressing things that happened to me in this journey happened 2 weeks ago. I've been to Google. I've written about Google. I've had one of their top senior people, one of the founding people on my podcast. I wrote about them as they were the best place to work in America and best place to work globally for years. So much so that they stopped in the competition because it's like, what do we got to prove? Well, they should have stayed in the competition. You know why? Because it held them accountable. And so what they did was they got ahead of their skis. They overhired like other tech firms did. But instead of saying, hey, let's reverse this by honoring the people who have been here, they said, we're going to lay off 12,000 people. And then on top of it, so as insulting as that was, like you do a hiring freeze in 6 months, 5 months, you're down to 12,000 people and nobody has to lose their job. Or you could furlough people and say, look, we need to get there financially. We've overhired and we're going to ask everybody to take 2-week unpaid leave. And by the time we're done, we'll have the savings, but nobody loses their jobs. I mean, you could have had creative ideas that I would have imagined would come from a company like Google. Instead, not only did everybody in the room go, yeah, we got to let 12,000 people go, but they did it by email. So you had people working for the company for 20 years, waking up and getting an email saying, hey, buddy, don't get out of your pajamas because you're not working here anymore. And then on top of that, neither the HR manager or their own direct manager picked up the phone and said, hey, Jay, I'm really sorry. Everything you did here was fantastic. We were cutting staff. We're not going to be doing that line of business anymore. And I'm so sorry. But HR tells them you're not allowed to say you're sorry. And the more you talk to people, the more likely there's going to be a lawsuit. And I'm like, yeah, inhumane. So I don't think business has learned its lesson yet, to be honest with you. And I don't know what it's going to take. But I used to think, honestly, that when the book came out originally, there's such compelling science. So all of a sudden, you're hearing people use this term heart-led leader and lead with heart. And like, I'm talking about this literally. Like, I'm saying the heart is a feeling sensing organ that communicates with the mind. If you understand from that point of view, it gets the Valentine heart. Coincidentally, tomorrow is Valentine's Day. And I see people talking about lead with heart, and then they put this Valentine heart, and I'm like, you don't realize what you're doing. You're associating it with love and romance and, puppy love and whatever the fantasy is. And that's not where we're going. We're talking about the biological heart. It's a very different thing. But I think if businesses, so I used to think, okay, when the science came out in the original book, that once CEOs understood this, they go, well, wait a minute, the guy's giving us a roadmap to optimize human behavior where we want them to. It'll make you more loyal and more productive and more committed. Why would we do this? And the reason is because they got to the top by not doing it. And so what they say is, why should I change? I'm already king of the hill. Why would I want to change and suddenly start to be caring and supportive of people like that? And not only that, but they said, I'm not willing to take that risk with my own people. Because we taught them, we drilled this into you that you don't care about people. You're indifferent. We're going to call them troops. We're going to call them personnel. We're not going to call them people. We're not going to call them humans. We're going to treat them as liabilities on the income statement. All this is intentional. So that when you need to cut money, you're just cutting a resource. You're not cutting another human being. And so if you can tell, I'm like in a state of discouragement right now, because it's like, the solution is right there if you would just, accept that the way we've done this has reached its end of utility is really what it comes down to. Can't go back, can't fix what we've done up until now, but what you can do is change how you're going to go forward. And so it's interesting because with all the threats of people losing their jobs, Great Resignation, we'll find out in a couple days, is continuing again. People are still quitting because it's not about money. It's about happiness. It's about well-being and thriving.
Yeah. And just so I kind of have the arc of this right, and while we're talking about tech layoffs, I'm curious if you think there's a relationship between the world becoming digitized or communication becoming digitized and employee engagement falling off the last 30 years. Because that was a fact I heard you cite in a podcast that you appeared on 2 years ago at the kind of height of the pandemic. This is not like a recent phenomenon. We've been seeing employee engagement wane over a 30-year period. So I'm curious what you think accelerated that decline, since I guess that would be sometime in the mid 90s, because we've been operating off of these sort of industrial principles for the last 100 years, but what happened in the last 30?
Well, go back to 2008 in the Great Resignation. This was the first time when, like the Great Resignation, if you remember, prior to was like the go-go period. Like, housing prices were going crazy, stock prices were going crazy. Everybody was kind of, rich and feeling like everything was thriving. And then it just hit. And when it hit really hard. And so companies decided that they were just going to do mass layoffs, like without even thinking about it. They're letting people go. They're not even thinking, well, how long is this going to go on? And could we endure? And, could we just sustain these people for a year and we get to the other side of it and we keep people working? Very few companies thought to do that. So what ended up happening was those people got laid off. And the people that didn't get laid off were like, wow, like you just tossed these people overboard so fast. And then millennials were coming of age. The first generation of millennials, the early millennials, were coming out of college, and they're observing this. And they're saying, wait a minute, like mom and dad were never home for me. They came to my soccer games on Saturday and Sunday and brought snacks and took us out to lunch afterwards because they felt guilty because they were working late every night. And then they get canned and they lose their 401k because the stock market crashes and they end up with nothing. So people look at that and they're like, I'm not selling my soul to a company anymore. And I think that's where engagement really started to slide. But what's really fascinating is that if you fast forward to 2020, so I had the benefit of writing several articles with Jim Harder, who's the head of research for Gallup. He's the one who created the well-being study. He's the one who created 30 years ago the engagement study. And he gave me state-of-the-art research that's in the book that he gave to me to publish in the book before they even published it themselves. And one of the stats that he told me was it was absolutely wonderful, was that after we all got sent home, engagement went from 33 to 40%. It's like the highest it's been in 25 years. You guys want to guess why it went up? Why would it go up that much during COVID?
Connection. I mean, there was this effort made to get to connect with people because we were all kind of going through a similar situation, and it felt like for the first time there may have been human connection, wow, we're really in this together kind of feeling.
So you're 100% right. So why would it go back to 32% a year later?
I would imagine it's because once that immediate need to feel like you were in this with somebody went away, then we went back to our normal kind of patterns of how we interact with each other.
That's it. So it's very astute. So I'm totally impressed. The key here is that we as managers said that was important, that kind of outreach. Hey, Jay, how you doing? Are you hanging in there? How's your family? Is this a good time to talk to you? I know you got family, you got kids online going to school. You want to talk at a different time? Hey, I just sent you a goodie package. It's got some food in it. It's got some popcorn and, all these kinds of love that we sent to people. And then we go, we're all settled into COVID. We don't need to do that anymore. We don't need to call Jay and go, hey, I'm just calling to see how you're doing. I'm not, we'll have another conversation about where you are on projects. I just want to know you're doing okay. Anything I can do to help you. Well, that's what I'm talking about, is what makes people thrive. And we threw it out, the baby with the bathwater, when we thought that COVID was pretty much behind us. So if you want to elevate engagement, resume those kinds of things, because that's what people need. That's what it's feelings. It's like, my boss cares enough about me to ask, is this a good time to talk to you? Now people are texting at 9 o'clock at night going, hey, I'm looking at your report. Can you tell me what you mean by this? And I'm like getting ready for bed. It's 9 o'clock at night. Why are you bothering me? Like, we've gone the opposite direction. Like we have no boundaries whatsoever. And then you ask the person, it's like, hey, man, why are you sending an email at 9 o'clock? Oh, well, they know I don't really expect them to respond. But go out to the people and ask them, do you expect to respond? Like, I don't know, but I'm not taking the chance.
Right, I
don't want to be judged as being a slacker and have that harm me. So I'm going to resentfully respond at 9 o'clock at night. And so what I'm saying is, if you want to be a really good manager, tell people, I'm not sending you an email at 9 o'clock at night. I'm not going to do that. I'm expecting you to go home and then be with your family or go. I just had my eyes checked today. And the guy has been the technician. He wasn't the doctor. But I go, what do you like to do? Like you guys, I just talk to everybody. And I go, waiting for the doctor to come in. I go, how'd you get into this? And he's telling me. And I go, what do you love most about this job? He goes, well, I love the job. I've been doing it for a really long time. But one of the things I love about it is we get in early, we leave, and I get home and I can go fish.
Mm.
And I go, you love to fish. Well, do you think anybody in that company knew that that's like his passion? But if you just indulge that with somebody and say, what do you like to fish? What comes alive? I know these answers because I talked to him. He goes, it's meditative. I get away and that rejuvenates me and I can come back to work the next day. I'm like, if only managers understood that, let the guy go fish. Don't let him go fish. And by the way, bring your phone because while you're out on the lake, I might be needing something from you. It's like after work, let them be by themselves. And, I know this sounds ridiculous and people go, well, business keeps going and I'm working late and I should be able to ask people. And my dad was like a top executive at General Electric when I was growing up. And he used to take the train in the morning and he'd take the train at night. And it was a long day. It was like, I was, where I lived, Long Island. And so he's taking the train into the city. It's like, 40-minute one way. And so it's an exhausting day, right? I don't know how he got from, he took a cab or a subway to get from the station to where he was going, to his office, but it's a very complicated process. But the minute that he got on the train in the morning and got on the train at night, nobody could get him.
Right.
So he could read the paper in the morning and do whatever work he wanted to. And then the same thing going home. He could think about his day and plan for tomorrow or sleep or whatever he wanted to do. The world didn't collapse. This is what I think we lose sight of, is that, everything has to happen instantaneously. And it's like, this is why people are so burned out. It's like, you can't keep going forever.
Yeah, no, you're right. And people are burnt out. People are angry and they're already anxious. And so think about how you can lessen some of those things. And, the story over the weekend where a company laid off folks on Super Bowl Sunday, that same company, they sent out an email like right before the Super Bowl started. And apparently like there were layoffs. I could be wrong on this. So somebody could fact check me, but allegedly that same company also had a $7 million, ad running that same night. And so it's like really weird, that kind of dynamic. But, one thing that you mentioned was millennials. This was a couple beats ago when you were talking about 2008 and the Great Recession. You talked about how millennials watched their parents see their 401k just dried up. And so they thought to themselves, well, why would I give my heart and soul to a company? Let's actually focus on that group a little bit more because they are obviously a growing group. They're going to be a majority of the workforce very soon. I mean, by the year 2026, they're expected to make up 3/4 of all workers. And so from your experience, from your work, from your research, what are you seeing from the millennial worker group in terms of what they require in the workplace? And similar to that pivot away from not giving my blood and sweat to one company for the rest of my life, what are some of the other kind of pivots that you're seeing away from traditional leadership models?
So interesting because it was like I'm sure I'll feel this way about Gen Z as they kind of emerge, but I love millennials, and I love millennials because they were paying attention. So I'll tell you a story. My son was an All-American water polo player and went to Cal Berkeley for school. And like in the first week, the coach told him, you're not big enough. I need to get you bigger. So you're going to redshirt. So my son calls me up and says, I'm going to be here 5 years. And I'm like, is your coach paying for the 5th year here? So he did that and graduated without any debt whatsoever. And then he came home and we were having breakfast one morning. This is very soon after he graduated. And I just, casually sipping my coffee. I go, what do you think you want to do? Like, what do you want to do next? And this is what he said, and you're going to hate him for it, but don't, because it was truth speaking, what he said. He said, I don't know, but I sure as hell don't want your career. And what he was saying was like, this informed me in writing one of the most successful articles I've ever written about how to manage millennials on LinkedIn, 750,000 views. And in the book, adding to that is that knowledge that they paid attention and they said, for you, me, for, since he was little, he watched me climbing the ladder in a corporation and getting where I wanted to get to, but with scars and with an investment that was, the amount of time and energy and the stress and stressful bosses, that he was like, I never want any part of that. So I had to unwind that. But I was like, I could have been offended by it. But instead, I was like, why would he say something that we have a great relationship? And he was really telling me was, that sucked, like what you had to go through. And I don't want that. And he's an entrepreneur today. He's never worked for anybody. And so like, that's the pivot. So this generation basically looked, and when you were talking about losing their 401ks, they didn't just lose their 401ks in the Great Recession, they lost their jobs. So they lost everything. And some of them ended up, because they no longer had the income coming in, lost their homes. Yeah. So I killed myself for this company only to have them throw me overboard the minute something's going wrong. I mean, it was indiscriminate in a lot of cases. Like, man, this is the trouble. We need to get rid of 5,000 people overnight. And so I think this is going to be the generation that says, enough, we're not going to do that. I'll tell you, interesting. I just read this article that said that CEOs with MBAs, so this is pre-2020, or excuse me, pre-2000. Allegedly in 2000, top MBA programs started teaching how to be more supportive of people. But up until then, it was all about what we talked about at the beginning of the conversation. Treat people like resources, treat them like inputs, don't get connected to them, don't care about them, all that. Well, not only did what they showed was that in 5 years that they actually, compared to the previous CEO, they took costs down by 6%. And there was no evidence that they had elevated performance in any key area after 5 years. But then they compared them to CEOs that didn't have an MBA, and they were willing to give up 20% of their profits with their employees. They were much more caring. The CEO with the MBA lost top people because people felt squeezed. The other places were thriving. So this is like my model. So I'm looking at this and I'm saying, okay, from an education standpoint, and when millennials came into MBA programs, some where our consciousness changed and we said, we can't teach this anymore. This is abusive. But the CEO at Disney, who just laid off 3% of his workforce a week ago, easily 3% of his population, 7,000 people, he easily could have said, hiring freeze, 3 months, this is over. What does he do? He goes out to Wall Street and he says, I'm going to save $5 billion, and it's starting with laying off 7,000 people. The next day, it's in the Wall Street Journal, says that there was an activist investor that was clamoring for cost saves. And once he saw what the CEO of Disney was willing to do, he was like, okay, you guys did more than I was expecting, so I'm good. So this is posturing. So what this meant to me was, at least, is that the CEO of Disney wasn't concerned about how do you protect people who have helped your company. They made $23 billion last year. The company, right, flush with money. My son just took his three little kids to Disneyland yesterday. He goes, it cost me almost $1,000 just to get in. Right. Yeah. So these people that make that experience magnificent, these were part of the 7,000 people. He didn't care about that. What he cared about was going to the investment community and saying, look what I did. I got heads, 7,000 heads. I just think it's reprehensible. And the other thing is that the other 97% of the people that are left are talking amongst themselves going, hey man, like if they need to cut more, we're next. So you've destroyed trust, you've destroyed culture. So we still have a long ways to go where, my dream of how to manage people. And I may come across sounding like I'm soft and I'm weak. That's not it. You have to drive profit. You have to drive, respectable productivity and get the job done. All that's part of leadership. You just don't have to forfeit human beings to make the profit so that shareholders are the only beneficiary of what the company is doing.
Yeah. And then bringing that back to millennials specifically, I mean, it's like they want accountability. They want to know that the attention that they're getting from their supervisor or their boss is personalized. And at the end of the day, they also know about all the other opportunities that are available to them right there at their fingertips. And so, just going back to just thinking about it from their perspective, treat them like real people, make them feel like their work matters, and give them, the visibility into your culture. Otherwise, you're going to start looking other places.
Spot on. And, what's happening here is that even though the Wall Street Journal had an article yesterday saying we're going to all have 60-year careers because we're living longer, and there's going to be some, we're going to, I know, right? Sounds like completely crazy. But at the same time, so we are living longer than any other generation. And the idea of retiring at 60 and going and playing shuffleboard has less appeal to people. So some people are staying longer. Some CEOs are staying longer. But we're already starting to see the transformation where the baby boomer and even older generation ahead of it are going. They're going to be gone. So that means you're going to have millennial managing millennial. And the millennial doesn't have that's not the way I learned it kind of a mentality. And, I was treated like crap when I was growing up. So people like crap, they don't have that mentality. So the good news is that while you have CEOs who are part of the MBA program of the pre-2020 making decisions to lay off people so that shareholders will admire them and elevate their share price, I really do believe that this next generation of leader will be millennials, and they won't tolerate that. They won't do that because they saw the pain. It's interesting. Howard Schultz, who's the founder of Starbucks, you guys probably know this story, but his dad was like a delivery guy, didn't make any money. They were living, like a tenement in Brooklyn, and he was delivering, I think, diapers, and he slipped on a piece of ice and hurt his back and was laid up. And Howard Schultz came home as a kid and sees his dad laying on the sofa, only to find out that as soon as the owner of the delivery company heard that he'd been hurt, he fired him immediately. It's like, well, you're no good to me. So Howard Schultz, when he became the CEO of Starbucks, his motivation was, I don't want to see that ever happen to anybody again. So this is where health insurance for part-time employees, obviously for full-time, college for, anybody who wants it. All that came from seeing what happened to his father and having the empathy and the compassion to say, I'm not willing to do that to anybody else. So this is my dream. This is my hope. But since you asked and you clarified what the millennials want, I really do believe that they're going to give it to one another. Like they're going to be the generation that changes consciousness, alters how we run business. And so all of this 12 years that I've been trying so hard to persuade business, I realized I can't persuade the people that are in business in CEO roles today. I have to persuade the generation that's coming up. So when they get their shot, they'll already know that this is the way to go. Because the CEOs, they're just locked in on what they're doing. And we're seeing it play out with all these layoffs. Disney didn't need to lay off, 7,000 people. They easily could have done a job freeze or come up with some clever way of saying, you people matter. We got to save some money. We're going to look at other ways. But if everybody sacrificed, including himself, the guy lays off 7,000 people. Did he say, I'm going to give up any of his income? Never mentioned, and he's probably making tens of millions of dollars.
I think the only one who's done that is the CEO of Zoom, who literally said he's,
taking $100 or something, ridiculously low or whatever, or he's $10,000 a year. Yeah, great.
Exactly. Yeah.
I'm curious. We were talking about in the beginning of before we started recording in the pregame, the importance of giving critical feedback alongside positive feedback. Do you have any critical feedback that you might be able to offer millennials, Mark? Is there any blind spots that you see us have that you might be able to comment on?
There's, in my mind, the baby boomer generation started in 1946 and ended in 1964. So if you were born in 1964, you're not really in the same generation as the person who was born in 1946, but they're all baby boomers. Same is true for millennials. So the first millennials were basically, it all depends upon who estimates it, but 1980. And then Gen Z, I think, starts in 1997. So there's a 17-year gap. So what I would say is go a little bit old school, where you're willing to take more crap. So I know this sounds completely antithetical to everything I'm talking about, but you do learn from a bad manager. You do learn from what you're willing to accept and how to maneuver around difficult situations when you work for a bad boss. So somebody was telling me, a friend of mine was saying that a relative of theirs who's a millennial has worked for like 5 tech companies. And I go, how old is she? She's like 26. And I go, 5 companies since getting out of college? Like, why? Well, she didn't like this in this company, she didn't like this, and these are good companies, like these are well-known companies. And I'm like, that answers your question, Jay, because I think it's like, put up with a little, see what you can learn, raise your threshold on what toxic looks like, because I think that the learning that can come from that is very powerful. And so I've asked people over the years, who did you learn the most from? Your bad boss or your good boss? What do you think the answer is?
Bad boss.
It's sad, but it's true, right? And it gives you sort of a roadmap of like the Howard Schultz, like, I'm never going to do that. And that's a good lesson. So if you just are repelled by that, and you're never going to be happy because you're chasing something that doesn't exist. Managing people is messy. Leadership is a very challenging thing. No matter how good of a boss I think I was, I think, if you got on the megaphone and say, anybody want to have anything bad to say about Mark Crowley as a boss, you wouldn't have a hard time finding somebody go, well, he never did this and he never did that. And that's not my intention. I wanted to be the best that I could possibly be for other people, but we're all human, right? So I think it's that. It's like, don't quit a job a month after you get it or 6 months after you get it. See what you can learn, see what you can prove to that person. Maybe try to win that person over. It's a communication thing. It's a persuasion thing. I've taken bosses that were unsupportive or threatened by me or, really didn't even care, and was able to influence them by seeing what was motivating them and behaving in a way that, could win their favor. And it helped me in my career. And I think we don't realize that. It's not always going to be perfect. Obviously, if it's really, really bad, then you got to go. But I hung on to some pretty bad managers and got to the other side of it and realized, man, I grew from that. Like I grew in ways that I wouldn't have been able to if I hadn't. So to the extent that you can raise your lid of your pain threshold a little bit, I think you'll grow more from that.
Yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. You mentioned that managing people is messy. So on that, let's tie in how we can communicate. So if you're, sitting down with a group of leaders, and one of the things around your book is like, yeah, I feel like it was written for a person who has a title of leader, but the way I was interpreting it and the perspective I had was the fact that you could be a leader really at any role in any position, and just even if you're an individual contributor, you can have like small micro leadership, going back to Alex Budak and his theory around micro leadership. You can take little actions, but regardless, I wanted to ask you, what are some questions that leaders should start asking their employees in their effort to discover the person's degree of engagement at work? I mean, what should a leader be asking their employees, or what should they be communicating more of to improve overall engagement?
I think it starts with making sure that the person's in the right job. So do they have the heart in it? So it's asking them. So I'm assuming in the way that you set this up that like I'm taking over a team of people that I don't know. So is that how you would go about this? So I don't know them, but I know the engagement is low. Go ahead.
Yeah, engagement is low. Let's just start there. Whether you know them or not, let's just pretend that you're at a company where engagement is low, or the morale is down. In a one-on-one, what can a leader be asking their employee to get a sense of that person's engagement level? And then overall, what should leaders be communicating more of to improve that engagement?
So I think that it's simple as, and I'll go on a little bit, but the formula is identify needs, fulfill the needs. So if I find out, for example, let's say, how old's your baby?
He's about to be 11 months.
11 months. So this is like crunch time at your house, right? It's like you get up, every day it's feed, bathe, diaper change, feed, bathe, diaper change. It's stressful, it's time consuming. And let's just assume that you and your wife alternate on taking the baby to daycare every day. Let's just assume that exists, right? So I don't know you. I work for. Sit down with you and I go, tell me about yourself. I'd like to know about what is it about this job that you like? What talents are you able to use here? And what are your aspirations? What would you like to do next? Are you happy just doing this for a long time? Because that's cool. Do you want my job? Do you want to go do something entirely different? So when you're getting personal like that, people are going to share that information. So sometimes, I've had people say to me, yeah, I do want your job. And then it's like, okay, well, then let's figure out how I can help you do that. But let's say that in the conversation, you say, well, I go, what do you find stressful about this job? And you go, getting here. And I go, getting here? What do you mean? And you go, well, 3 days a week, I take my baby to daycare. And it's 15 minutes away from my home in the opposite direction. So by the time I get on the road, and I have to do it according to the baby's schedule, when the baby wakes up, when I get him fed, when I diaper, all that. It's not I'm in control of it. Hey, baby, get ready because daddy's got to go to work.
Right.
So I find that I'm driving to work and I'm speeding like a madman because I don't want to be late. And I have been late. And I feel like I'm going to get in trouble for that, but it's just because of where I am in my life. So I can say, well, I'm sorry, get your baby up earlier, or have your wife take her. I could be that insincere in that. Or I could say, well, why don't you come in 15 minutes late and stay 15 minutes late, or make it up some other way? And you're going to go, you would do that for me? Now, how big of a give was that? Did I really, are you going to am I going to lose money or huge productivity? Actually, what's going to happen is you're going to go, I want to give back to that guy. I want to reciprocate because he just made my life so much easier. So if my baby oversleeps, I'm not going to have to worry about, rushing him or feeding him, taking a banana in the car, even though he's not eating hard food yet. I'm making it up, but you get the idea.
Right.
It's I've just taken off of stress. So what I've done for you is something I wouldn't do for anybody else because you got an 11-month-old baby. So if I go to Jay and I go, Jay, what's going on, and tell me what you do. He says, I really have been looking at a different job. I see this other job in the company and I think I'm not ready to go there yet, but I'd like to be prepared for that. So there's certain things that I'd like to learn. And I go, like what? Well, I can teach you some of those, or I can have you go and spend a day with somebody who's doing that. And Jay goes, well, you would do that for me? Well, now I'm making an investment in Jay. Now managers go, well, if I'm making an investment in Jay like that, then, he's going to take all the learning that I give him and then he's going to leave. So why the hell would I want to do that? Well, the reason you do that is because it builds a reputation of, if you work for Arjun or Jay, they're going to develop you and you're going to become more. And that's what you're here for. So you're never going to have a problem attracting people because you've got a reputation of being a grower and a developer and a realist. Nobody stays with you forever. So I don't own you. All I can say is that if I want to engage you, I'm going to meet your needs in a unique, caring way, in a way that's authentic and genuine and personalized. So I'm helping Jay get on with his career and learn more. And I'm helping you at, a very important time in your life where you want to be with your baby and you don't want to be 90 miles an hour with the baby in the car, without the baby in the car. You want to be completely centered by the time you get into work. Both of you are going to be really happy with that. And that's how I find people get really engaged, because it's how you make them feel. And by doing those things, I'm not making that big of a sacrifice, but I'm making enough of one that makes an impact on you where you're like, I'm going to make it up to them. I'm going to find those 15 minutes back. If I have to come back at home, I'll do the work, but I'm never going to let Mark down. That's what I've learned, is that you never sacrifice by giving. You just don't. So that's, people think, oh, you need to measure it more. You need to ask them more often, and poll surveys and all that kind of stuff. You can do that, but that's the mind telling you how to manage engagement. The heart says, help people, make them feel like you're there, not just a boss, but as an advocate. And when people feel that, they're going to kill for you. They're going to scale mountains for you. And I proved it over and over and over in my career. And I proved it with men and women, education, college degrees, no college degrees, didn't matter what the job, family was. I just, interestingly, I don't want to jinx this because it's not a real thing yet, but it looks like it will be. But I was just asked to consult a bank in Eastern Europe to implement lead from the heart philosophy.
Nice.
And when he asked me, I was just like, this is just a reminder of what we're talking about. It doesn't matter who people are. This is human. This is how you affect human beings. You support them and their needs, and they'll support you with what you're trying to do. And if you treat people like all you want to do is treat them like a commodity and they're just like easily replaceable, they don't matter to you, people feel that. The minute they feel that, they're like, why would I want to give them any more than what I have to? And that's why engagement's sitting at 32%.
Yeah, that's really interesting, because when you come from the heart and you connect to the heart, you're going to lift the spirit.
Brilliant. That's it. I mean, that's it. Can't add anything to that.
Yeah, that says it all. I guess my last question for you, Mark, would be, how do you kind of get the ball rolling or the fire started on this way of thinking within an organization? Because there may be one manager out there that is really inspired by your book, and they may be surrounded by people that have never read the book and are not exposed to these ideas. How do you think one person within an organization that may be sort of interpersonally dysfunctional might help get the ball rolling?
I think it's a really interesting question, because when I wrote my book, so I had been a senior leader at one of the largest financial institutions in the country, and I was named leader of the year. So I had street credibility. Like, people knew I was a good leader, right? So I'll leave it there. So my book comes out 2 years later. It's called Lead from the Heart. And I swear to God, people that I used to work with were like, did he have like a religious experience or a mental breakdown, or like, what is this lead from the heart thing? I'm not kidding. Like, we were talking about tribes earlier, but this is what people were responding to. Like, they didn't get it. And the reason they didn't get it is because they never asked me, how do you get these phenomenal results? No one ever asked me. People observed what I was doing, and my company kept promoting me. Said, that guy, he's a good leader and people like working for him. But they didn't go, let's look to see what's happening underside, what's happening inside of people. They didn't go, what is it about Mark that you respond so well to that you wouldn't respond somebody else to? They never did it. So they hear heart and they think, oh, there's something, poor Mark, this is what happens. You go away for a couple of years and this is what happens to them. And they just sort of dismissed it. So this is a long way of saying that people don't really pay attention to how you get results. The people who work for you do. So I never, I can't tell you that everybody that I ever worked for led the way that I'm prescribing. They didn't. And some of them were massive takers, like bleed you to death if you let them kind of people. But I never passed that on to my own people. So I think it's that. I think it's manage your own team the way you think is best. And your influence will grow because people will want to work for you and you're going to get better results than people that are managing traditionally. And at some point, people are going to go, what are you doing? And then you share that. And then it becomes me to Jay, Jay to Arjun, Arjun to someone else. It's not Mark to the CEO. Okay, everybody, we're all going to do this at the same time. That hasn't happened in my life. I hope it does. It's happening in the Czech Republic. You just mentioned that, but at least, so that's like a mind blower, but it hasn't happened in America where a company has said, we're going to do this. We're going to teach everybody at the same time. But I think it's coming. I really do think it's coming, but be the person. Even if you're not managed that way, don't wait for permission. Manage this way yourself. It's a much more satisfying way to manage. It's much more aligned to what gives people joy. Most of us don't like having our thumb on people or micromanaging them or managing them with fear. I don't think most of us get a lot of satisfaction out of that. So do it the way you know how, do it the way I prescribe, and let your influence grow from there.
I love it. I highly suggest folks follow you on Twitter. Obviously, pick up the book, Lead from the Heart. It's definitely an invitation to become more aware of your heart's intelligence. I mean, we didn't even get into the science of the intelligence of your heart and what it carries. But while we're living these very busy lives and it's all about hitting the next accomplishment, this book kind of slows it down, brings you back to understanding the power of the heart. And I think I'll leave it with a quote that you had in your conclusion from Pericles way back in the day. We're talking about the BC days. The quote is, "What you leave behind is not what is engraved in stone monuments, but what is woven into the lives of others." So I think that's a great way to end this conversation and invite folks to continue to follow what you're doing. I know I will be.
I'll add one more thing to this because it's a brilliant ending. One of the things that I have a career to look back on. A lot of people listening have their career ahead of them. This is a second career for me, and I did it for 25 years. And so in those 25 years, I look at it and I go, what did I get out of that besides financial, pay, all that? And what I got is massive satisfaction of knowing what influence I had in people's lives. So that's why that quote is there. So Pericles said it 2,500 years ago, but that was my direct experience. Like, I don't remember what my goals were. I remember what we hit. All I remember is I saw this person go from here to here to here to here. I saw people not believing in themselves, become self-confident. That is joyful. And that's what I think most people, if you get to be 50 years old, 55 years old, and you look back on your career and you can't say you did that, you're going to live with regret. You're going to live with regret because you could have.
And that feeling of joy is really a feeling that is a result of love.
I can't add anything to that. That is 100% true. And, as long as we're talking about the heart, we might as well say, I end every speech and every podcast with the same two things. Lead from the heart, your people will follow, and love your people. And what we don't understand is that when I say to you, you can come in, 15 minutes or half an hour later and stay later so that you can take care of your baby. That's love. And people, it's like, no, it's like, that's the highest energy on the planet. It's what we all need. It's what we all want. So if you can give that to people and they feel that, that's what's transformational. That's what influences people when they get that. So yeah, I loved people my whole career. And when I saw them succeed, I felt like that's a part of me there. Like that's joyful for me because I helped them. And if all you do is make it transactional and just, I need this, hit this number, get this to me tomorrow. If that's how you spend your career, and I've had bosses that did this, I don't know what they get back on. Their piles of money. It's not a way to spend, the one precious life you have.
Yeah. Amazing. No, thank you for sharing space with us. Thank you for sharing your insight, and thank you for this experience.
No, thanks for inviting me, guys. I really appreciate it, Arjun and Jay, and go Mets and Padres.